One of the most important relationships broadcasters can have with a sports team is with the media relations department, finding the right stories to help make the viewing experience more complete. I sit down with one of the best media relations people in the business to talk about Super Bowls, the collegiate athlete, and what it takes to work in sports media. Next on Sports in the Making. Hello, everyone. Thank you for listening to Sports in the Making, where we find out about people who work in the sports and broadcasting industry, find out what they do, and how sports comes together. I'm your host, Don Cardona, and this is episode 6. My guest today has built relationships with collegiate and professional athletes spanning nearly 30 years of his career, mostly working in media relations departments. He's worked with a variety of Division I universities and NFL teams, including the best, in my opinion, sports franchise in pro football, the Denver Broncos, during their back-to-back Super Bowl championship seasons in the late 1990s. His name is Paul Kirk, and we met when we were both students at Arizona State University. I was in the broadcasting school, and he was a graduate assistant in the athletics department. I approached him at the time with a show I created called Sun Devil Sports Spectrum, and I requested athletes to be on the show. I didn't really understand what a sports information director or media relations person did at the time, but I learned quickly, and we've been friends ever since. On this episode, we talk about what working in media relations is like, his time with the Broncos, and what the differences are between collegiate and pro sports. All right, Paul, although we've kept in touch sporadically over the years, we haven't talked much until recently, so I want to thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So what is it you do in your role with University of Utah Athletics?
Well, I'm the Associate Athletic Director for Strategic Communications at the University of Utah Athletics. And overall, the job is to help tell the story of Utah athletics, as it is in these positions all across the country. It's very similar to pro sports PR departments. Obviously, some different dynamics and a broader scope with multiple sports. But, that's what it's become, I think, as we realize our role and what the importance of it is to tell the story. It's to show people who our student athletes are, who our coaches are, why you should support them, why you should be excited about them. You publicize all the great things. You help nominate for awards, write press releases, keep the website updated, and so much more now. Social media and all those other aspects of it give us the ability to tell our story our own way, while still maintaining the importance of working with the news media for them to help tell our story and for us to try to help shape what that narrative is.
When it comes to the university, is there a certain set of guidelines that you need to stay within, considering they are still students and, there's a lot of pressure from a lot of sports fans for them to do well, or, if they're not doing well, there's that pressure for them to do better?
It is important, and I think, as much as we all know that they are public figures and there's a lot of following for college sports, and that it is, to a large degree, it is a big business, so to speak. I think one of the important things in our role, though, is to continue to emphasize and protect the fact that they are student athletes, that it is amateur athletics, and that it is different than professional sports. And I think one of the ways we keep that in mind every day is in our dealings with the media. It's very different in professional sports in that we don't have mandated open locker room times during the week, if you use the football comparison in the NFL. The locker room isn't open post-game, but we coordinate the media access. We're far more involved in coordinating the media access to try to help the student-athlete time demands, but also it's just the spirit of it. And I think, I'll give credit to the news media that by and large, I believe those who cover college sports and the athletes in it do it differently than professional sports, maybe in the type of scrutiny they put on, the way they might approach a story. There is a subtle difference there, and I respect those who really are aware of that and try to preserve that, but ultimately that is a big part of our role. Now, there's also a whole myriad of NCAA compliance and student-athlete time demands that we have to work within and are honored to help work within to try to help them keep their focus on, first, being a student, second, being an athlete who has many demands within that spectrum, as they also, though, try to be successful in interacting with the media and with us in helping them to gain the the coverage and the type of attention that they deserve.
You mentioned new media, social media, things of that nature. How has that affected your job, and how do the athletes deal with that in this day and age?
It has changed it entirely. I could go on and on about the ways. I mean, one of them is that all day there's 2 screens on my desk, and one of them is on TweetDeck. Just, a lot of that's to follow the media, but a lot of that's to follow our student athletes. And it has evolved so much, and I'll give credit to this generation, how well they are versed in navigating that world now. It's not so much about to say, don't do that, don't do this. It's, they're pretty savvy about those things now. It's mostly just for us to stay aware and stay informed and then see areas where we can help them. But that has changed everything. It's, like it's said about the media world and about PR and media relations. It's changed the news cycles to being constant and 24/7. And that can be difficult in some ways, but I also think like anything in life, you have to look at it like, how does this also make us better? And that for us as PR people, if we follow the right people, from media to industry people to our own athletes, it makes us better, though, because we're just more aware. Now, how you manage it and how you actually get everything else done is not easy, but it's different.
Yeah, and managing it, I remember early in my career, it was always said that the media relations department would coach athletes in what to say. Does that still happen?
It does, and it's. I guess we try to look at it like, how can we help you be successful at this? Help you see a scope maybe broader than how you interact with it and come into it every day and look at it kind of among your peers. Again, we're kind of careful with this term because of the amateur aspect and the student athlete part, but to help them for their future, it is part of building their brand. And that is a big part of what we do. And what I think their coaches and their sport programs are helpful in them realizing is that they do have visibility. They are building their own brand for life beyond college, whether pursuing a career in their field, whether it's professional sports or if it's not, that they're building their brand. So it's continuing to equip them and help them see a little broader world and have them thrive in that rather than have it be an oh no or something to worry about. Sure, there's cautionary tales, no doubt, and those are helpful for us to share. But again, I think it changes so fast, and now you have a generation that has known this almost entirely throughout their lives, that they haven't learned it, they've lived it, and they're pretty good at it. And it's just helping them be themselves, but knowing how they can thrive in it and have it not be a negative and a distraction.
Yeah, and I'm sure the majority of what goes out there on social media is positive, but on the off chance you do get something that you're like, oh, why did they do that? How do you deal with something like that?
It's, sometimes it's working with their sport program to help them be aware and determine the best approach. And a lot of times what that is us contacting them directly and helping them maybe see the downside of it and giving them a recommendation or a suggestion for how to remedy it. And I think, within that, it comes back to something that's important for everything we all do in our jobs, and that's building a relationship first. We hope that over time in working with people, you've built a relationship, and therefore there is trust, and that they know we're trying to help them. I mean, again, some things are just so straightforward that you kind of have to let somebody know, hey, you can't do that. You want to help yourself here by adjusting in this way. But more than that, you're trying to help equip them for the next situation. And that brings to mind another aspect, and that is their visibility on social media tied to their performance and how fans, or those who would purport to be fans in more the fanatical element, will interact with them, and how to help them navigate that. I mean, that's something that you and I didn't have growing up, even if, in the realm that we were interacting with people broader than who we knew face to face. And I don't know how much of that there really was for each of us growing up, but here you have the potential for that. And it's constant, and it can really affect kids, and helping them navigate that is a big part of it too. And I don't know what that's like, to be the one receiving that kind of negative attention.
Yeah. So you mentioned building personal relationships. Is it something that you're able to, spend time with them, obviously at the school, but outside of the school, you get to know them, or is it pretty much strictly business?
It is the latter, but I think it's very structured, and they do have so many demands on their time that is the realm in which we generally interact. So I think the challenge we have is in those limited interactions, being authentic, trying to help them understand a little bit about what we do and why we do it, and then building trust within that we are one more piece of a really broad network of support that you have here as a student athlete to help you be successful, whether it's the athletic trainer keeping you healthy and the mental conditioning for all aspects of your mental and physical well-being. It's academic advisors to help you in that realm. It's equipment, how they have you set up for practice, for competition. To see it as one more piece of that, this is the realm that we work in, and it's all to help you be successful. Sometimes you get limited actual time, and I think when those opportunities come, you have to be authentic and try to be intentional in our minds about part of our purpose here, not have it just be transactional, that person only talks to me when they need me to do X, Y, and Z, and then I do it and on they go. I mean, yeah, there's a portion of it that is rooted in that, but then that's where we have to, really be intentional about why we're here and that we're here to help them.
So with the potential rule changes coming, I guess, with the NCAA and the athletes being able to monetize themselves, how will that affect you, do you think?
That is a great question. And to say that I have a full picture, or that anybody would at this point, of how it will affect us wouldn't be true. There's so much about it that is to be determined. But I think, that's where I think most athletic departments will be very well poised to help navigate through that. Everybody's, mentally prepared for the fact that this shift is happening, and we'll navigate this. But I don't know exactly how yet. It's an interesting space.
All right, let's talk a little bit about your history. Where does your love of sports come from?
Came from as early as I can remember. My brother, my dad, others in our family always loved sports. It was one of the first things I knew, and has continued to be something I never imagined being a career for me, but I'm so thankful it has become one.
When was it, when you were younger, when you decided that this could be something I could do for a career?
Well, as I mentioned, my brother, right? We grew up playing sports together, watching sports, consuming everything there was for sports, which, of course, back in those days, in the late 70s and early 80s, there were fewer avenues. It was mostly through TV and magazines and newspapers, but we consumed everything we could, and especially living in a small town in Alaska, those channels were even fewer. But we participated in sports and followed it. And then as we got into college, he's 2 years older. I kind of followed his path, and he was in the communications school at University of Washington, and I followed him into that. And we both, I think what we thought at the time was when we're no longer able to compete in athletics, which for us was certainly when we went to University of Washington, we weren't at that level. It was, I think what we knew about the way to participate in it was you had to be in the media. So you try to be a broadcaster or a sports writer. And without really saying that was my specific goal, I think we kind of just both were on that path of pursuing that. Now, as we got further into it, and it came time for me to declare which track of the communications program to go into at Washington, I decided to choose the public relations track. And just by chance then, being ambitious, I saw that there was a student public relations group. So I joined that. And as fate would have it, or as God guides things, it was amazing that the first meeting I went to, this was not a sports public relations group. It was the University of Washington Student Public Relations Group. The first guest speaker they had was the Seattle Seahawks Vice President of PR, Gary Wright. And I listened to him talk. I thought, that's exactly what I want to do. This is amazing. And I walked up to him afterwards, and I asked him, how do I get into this? And he told me to go to the sports information office. He told me who the sports information director was. And the next day I walked in there. And to speed things up, I ended up getting a student assistant job. It took a little persistence, but it was a great opportunity, and things built from there. So there are many more facets to it. But the bottom line is it was a continued evolution of pursuing what I thought was getting into sports through sports media. And then I was interested in the public relations part and was so fortunate that Gary Wright was that first speaker.
Yeah, so then you did that for, I would assume, the rest of your Washington collegiate career.
Yeah, it wasn't until my junior year, so I did go an extra quarter. So I had about a year and a half, ended up being parts of 2+ school years that I was able to gain that experience. And then after I had done that for about a year, I then applied for the internship with the Seahawks and was able to get that, and that helped the experience and built that relationship more, where I learned from Gary and from his staff and got to know the media in Seattle. And the more I experienced and learned, the more I liked it. And just being persistent and having a work ethic that I'm thankful I grew up with from the people around me, I just kept pursuing the next opportunity. And that, as I finished at Washington, at that time I had internships with the Seahawks and then game day work for the Seattle Mariners and the Sonics, God rest their soul. That was all part of the experience. Those Seattle sports teams that I grew up following and cheering for, and certainly none of that dissuaded me from wanting to go further into it. It was fantastic, and I can say that I'm so fortunate that I had great mentors, starting with Gary and with the sports information directors at Washington and so forth, who I learned from. There are so many terrific people in this business, but you don't know at the time necessarily because you don't have the scope to know. Those are also some of the very best in the industry, and that was something I couldn't control. I could control my work ethic and how much I put into it, but I couldn't control that part, and I really benefited from that as I graduated and then got a graduate assistant job at Arizona State, where we first met then. Mark Brandt, working for him there, working at Cardinals games for Paul Jensen. It just, each opportunity, I was so fortunate that they were also really talented, really helpful, and really influential people in the business, which sort of magnifies and accelerates what opportunities might come from the work you put into it.
What are the things that somebody who's just starting out and doing what you do, what are the tasks or responsibilities that they have, as brief as you can?
Well, and it certainly has changed since I was doing it, because at the time at Washington there's a stack of newspapers over there, the 5 kind of metro area dailies. And, we're a few weeks behind on those. Do the clips. Literally clip out the stories, paste them down, photocopy all of them. So that was what I can never complain about that, because that's what gave me the opportunity at Washington. Sit down and do that. And I thought, okay, that's fine. And I started to get to know people and then work at a few games and really enjoyed it. But I share that example because now we don't even necessarily do clips necessarily, even electronically. Everything's so accessible. We do it for feature clips so we can share interesting stories with the broadcast crew about our program and help when they're doing one of our games. But everything is so easy to find via Google that you don't necessarily have to maintain those files the same way. So to get back to it, what would be the things? I would just say knowing that there is no task too small. Even if you don't yet understand the importance of it or why we're doing this, A, ask questions, and B, just trust. There's obviously a reason, and it's kind of fun when you start to peel back the layers of the onion, you start to understand how all of that works. But I look back at some of those days at Washington and even ASU when I realized how little I knew about the bigger picture, but thank goodness I had those great mentors to help connect those dots and show why doing this is important, why this seemingly menial task is foundational for us to do the bigger things that look like way more fun.
All right. Now, I grew up a Denver Broncos fan, and I was really happy to hear that you ended up getting a job in the media relations department with the Broncos. So how did that come about, and what are your responsibilities with a professional club?
Well, it ties directly to Gary Wright and the Seahawks, Paul Jensen and the Cardinals. Those opportunities to work for those individuals opened a world to other NFL PR directors and the relationships they all have with one another, not unlike positions I've been fortunate to be in now in my career and help others. It was those personal relationships and those people speaking on my behalf that paved the way for that opportunity, to where literally when the Denver Broncos had an opening and Jim Saccomano, the great longtime PR director of the Broncos, talked with his peers, Gary Wright said, here's who you need to hire. I mean, those are things that I never could have imagined happening, and was really grateful that there are a lot of things he could have said and a lot of people he could have talked about. And ultimately, to have had the opportunity for him to say that is what put me in that position. And that was in March of 1995, near the end of my second year as a graduate assistant. So the clock was ticking. If something needed to happen, and I would have gone to probably any professional sports franchise anywhere, And it turned out that it was one of the best franchises in all of pro sports. It was in one of the best cities, though I'd only been there once or twice and had never lived there. I knew there were a lot of positives, and little did I know there were even more to come. But it was fantastic timing. But again, I would have gone anywhere, just about. And I had, once again, no idea that the person for whom I was going to work for had some idea, was fantastic. But what would lie ahead, there'd be no way to predict that.
Well, you got there when they were really successful, and the last few years they've not been so good, as we all know. But what was the environment for you there, and how did you grow into being the director of media relations?
There are a few different aspects to that, how different it was. When I was hired, it was about 2 months after Mike Shanahan had been hired as head coach. So I had some sense that some things were changing, but not until later, again, could I gain the perspective to know just how rapidly they were changing and what not just a head coaching change it was, but a complete culture change that ultimately, along with great players and great ownership, led to those back-to-back Super Bowl championships and then down the road another one to come. But also the world of going from collegiate sports to professional sports, even though I'd had those internship experiences, being mid-20s and now being in that environment, it was very different. Organizations were smaller then too, than they are now. And so everybody was older. There were only a few of us, quote, young people in the organization, a couple in equipment, facilities, and in PR and marketing, but not really many. Everybody was older. And that was a big change at first. I mean, there was something about working in college athletics when you're still in your mid-20s that you're not that much older than the student athletes, and a lot of the coaches and graduate assistants are young, and it's really vibrant and energetic. Well, it was fast-paced and challenging in the NFL, but a different vibe than that. It was much more corporate, much more adult-like, And so, but again, it was incredible because of the people there. And the other challenge was the media market that it was. And I, having been in Seattle and been in Phoenix, I'd say those were very friendly media markets in terms of how they interacted with one another and what kind of information they shared and how they worked together, even though they were competing against one another. I had not seen anything like the Denver media market. First of all, you had still 2 daily morning papers that had been competing for 100 years. And in that day and age then, the biggest battleground was in sports, and it was on the Denver Broncos beat. That was ground zero. That was the flashpoint. And it showed by the number of really prominent sports writers who came through there and went on to other things. And also just that competition, how it changed how we interact with the media, and how much more I learned about building and preserving those relationships and helping not be in the middle of the competition, but not be blind to the fact that it's there. And there are a lot of examples I could give, but I won't bore you by going down that track. But that was an eye-opener too. That writer doesn't just tell that writer what the other player said about his injury? Oh, no, not here.
What's the balance there then? I mean, you've got local news, you've got national news, you've got networks out there that are, I would imagine, constantly asking you for something. What's the balance and how you deal with each one of them?
Well, that's the challenge, is that you do it all, and that's where a veteran like Jim Saccomano was so fantastic to learn from, because it's far more art than it is science, and in trying to navigate through those minefields, not to over-dramatize it. It's just, you have to have your head on a swivel. You have to know that the volume will be high, and it's exhausting, but it's also invigorating, because it's exciting in our business to know that you're at a place where there's relevance, where there's importance on helping facilitate all of this and navigate it really well. And it's so much beyond the normal transaction of producing information and setting up interviews. There's a lot of egos involved. There's a lot, and I mean that in a positive way. There's just high achieving, high accomplished people, not only in our locker room, not only in our coaching staff and ownership, but in the media.
Right.
It's the best of the best. And they compete that way, and that's why they're where they are. And it opened my eyes a lot to realizing, okay, I'm here for a reason, so I'd better keep figuring out what that is and be really respectful of that. So I think that was the biggest thing, is that you had to be prepared for all that volume and be a quick learner and try your best. And this is where I referenced Jim being so respected and such a master at it is that I think all those media members knew that Jim was working on their behalf, but he was absolutely representing the Denver Broncos and their interests at all times. That's not an easy walk, but I think when you are as transparent as you can be and authentic as you can be and really on your game, they'll realize that and they'll know where those boundaries are, and it doesn't come overnight. That's all I can say.
Yeah. You had mentioned earlier building relationships with the collegiate athletes. Is there a difference in dealing with professional athletes, some of whom are household names?
There's a lot of similarities, but absolutely there are differences. I think one thing I've really enjoyed being back in college sports, which has now been over the last 8 years after having been out of college sports for about 16. A lot changed in that time. What I really enjoy, and there were so many great interactions I had and great people in those years with the Broncos that I cherish to this day. But you find in general that most student athletes in that 18 to 22-year-old range, they want to learn, why they're doing this, how can you be better at it, how can they take what we're trying to help teach them to really thrive and be successful. I like that willingness, and it's kind of some of their first exposure, though. Again, so many in high school now are getting a lot of media coverage, and they're all building their brands on social media already. Mm-hmm. But there is still a lot ahead of them, and that receptiveness to learn and take in a story or two from some of the past experiences I've had. They're fun to share as ways of relating that there's ways to approach this that you can really benefit from. And when you can share an anecdote or a story about a moment or a thing in time that you experienced, it's fun to be able to pass that along. And their receptiveness is really refreshing.
When it comes to dealing with Super Bowl hype and media requests and everything like that, how did you do it during Denver's back-to-back Super Bowl seasons?
Yeah, that was my third and fourth seasons of full-time work there. So I guess in a way I had just enough time to get my feet under me and learn a little bit. And yet it still comes at you 100 miles an hour every day. And thank goodness, again, Jim Saccomano had been through this several times before with, in the John Elway era. We were already, 11 years into it by then, 12 years by the time I got there. And it was still, very different than now, where again, we didn't even have social media. It was, a different landscape. But I remember, Jim sharing a couple times that, okay, by now our local media, they know how to get this done. They have their relationships. The structure we put in place for access, they're kind of on their own. Now where we need to facilitate things one-on-one and this sit down and that sit down is mostly with the national media, who are not here as often with us, who in some cases, of course, they all had great relationships. They cover the sport. But that was where we had to put our attention. Again, yes, we do it all, but there's also only so many hours in a day and only so many of us. There were only really three of us full-time in PR at that time. And I'll say that pro sports NFL PR departments are not that much bigger now, which is pretty remarkable, the work they do. But we had to prioritize it like that you set up. The biggest part is really the planning with the league and with your head coach for what the structure and availability and access is going to look like, and then you open the doors and you manage it, and then when it closes and they go back to the media room. A lot of it was getting that set up, and Jim did a lot of that, but it's that's more of what I do now, is working with the coaches to establish what is our access and how do we manage it. So the biggest part was putting a plan in place and then just working that plan. And then above and beyond that, you had all of the individual requests, the one-on-ones, the televising network that basically lives with you for 2 weeks, and all the different elements that go into it. Even at that time, it was a lot of hours of coverage and a lot of separate interviews and time of the athletes that you had to help structure for them.
Yeah, and I'm sure not just the national media requests, international. How many media requests do you think you got while you were there for the Super Bowl?
I don't even know that I could put a number on it now, but it's funny you mention that, because when I moved in June for this job here at Utah, when I was coming from Colorado State, I did come back across a lot of my stuff from, what was 22 years ago now, or 21 years ago for some of it. And in the Jim Saccomano method of the phone message pad, it was a reporter's notebook, line by line, the message, the phone number, and then checking them off as you went. And I still have those reporters' notebooks. And it's funny to look at the date down the left side and how in those January 97, January 98 for the Super Bowl 32 and then 99 for Super Bowl 33, how many pages for the same day, and that it was beginning to be email at that time, but it was voicemail. That while you handled one situation, that many more messages just piled up on your phone. And it seems less efficient than the way it is now, but it just had to be done. And so, I look back at that, and you could then go to other times of the year and, how many weeks would go by on one page. But no, in those days, it was how many pages per day. And some of the names, that was fascinating too. Names you still see in the media now, names that have retired, and like, oh my gosh, I haven't thought of him or her in a long time.
Yeah.
But it was everybody from everywhere, yes.
I can imagine. What's the craziest media request you think you've ever gotten? Whether Super Bowl, because I know that everybody comes out for the Super Bowl, or just in regular season.
The funny thing is, you hear athletes talk about, I started to hear from people I hadn't known since my childhood. Even for employees, we got a little bit of that. There were people I hadn't heard of since my childhood who suddenly had interest in whether they could get tickets. And I thought, wow, and this is well before Facebook, where it was that much easier to find somebody or keep in touch. But as far as media requests, I know if we went on long enough and I thought long enough, I'd think of a perfect example. But I think most that would fall into that category would just be those where somebody, while really prominent and important, as they all are, might have a mistaken notion that I just need like a half hour with John Elway. Just let me know when we can do that. And you're trying to think, I don't even know if there's 5 minutes. It was mostly in that realm of just the well-intentioned but naive thought of, but it's just me and I just need, and I think, well, you multiply that out.
Yeah.
Those were, so I don't know, that's not an amazing anecdote or anything. And I know there were some just bizarre experiences that come with the visibility at that level. It's the NFL, it's the Super Bowl, and it was Hall of Famers like John Elway, Terrell Davis, Shannon Sharp, Gary Zimmerman, you name it. It was an incredible experience to go through, and I'm so grateful. And mostly now, going back to people and relationships, the really special people that were part of that organization, from ownership through players and staff, that are a big part of why that team was successful, why those teams were successful. Just really special people.
I don't know what your relationship might have been with Pat Bowlen, but the amount of things that everybody says about the ownership, it seems like a very special place to have been.
Absolutely. I could not say enough great things about Pat Bowlen as a person, as a franchise owner, as a boss, and everything I referenced earlier about, being so fortunate to have gone to that franchise in that city at that time. A lot of that was that it was Pat Bowlen's Broncos. And the more I learned and the more I understood about how different that was than the other 29 at the time and then 31 NFL franchises, was staggering. That they're not all the same. That, I know it sounds silly to say, but the more I learned, if you're from peers around the league who have great jobs and really enjoyed their owners, the experience was not the same. And we were so fortunate and so blessed to work for that organization. I mean, the city and the state were fortunate to have a franchise owner who invested everything back into the team and trying to win. That everything was about, how do we be the best at everything? And that it was consistent with how Mike Shanahan coached and managed his team, but they were both important. Both parts of the standard that we knew we had as employees was at the very top level, and there was no margin because the emphasis was everybody's role is important, not more important than something else. But if you're here, you're part of us trying to win a championship. And so he was there every day, but never in a sense that it was overarching or trying to micromanage everything. It was support. It was because that was where his heart and his time and everything was invested, and he loved it, and he wanted us to be successful. So of course he'd be there, but empowered everybody to do their job and and continue to challenge themselves as far as what that is and how it contributes to the bigger picture. It was just no nonsense, straightforward. We want to win championships.
Yeah.
That Bowlen was phenomenal, and all of that reflection and celebration of his life when he passed away last summer really brought back a lot of memories. I had just moved to Utah, and it was really interesting to watch all of it from afar and talk to some friends from back in those days, like Jim and others. I'll always be appreciative, that's for sure. Yeah. Treated employees so well. I mean, in the time I was there, I went from just moving there for that job and being mid-20s and single to eventually being a father of three. All three of my kids were born while I worked there. And the support for families when you had fantastic things like that happening or misfortune that families would go through. It was a family organization and so well supported that these things just didn't happen off on the side in your own life. They were part of the Broncos organization.
Yeah, and the Broncos, I know, have a really good reputation around the league and in sports in general for the way they treat their people. But you did leave the Broncos to start your own venture called ProLink Sports. What was that about?
You know, that experience came about through my business partner in that, whose idea it was, Judy Ann Atencio. She and I founded ProLink Sports in the spring of 2008, and her background had been in working with pro athletes on charitable foundations, 501c3 organizations, and the really high level of athlete philanthropy. And we had come to know each other because she had run Jake Plummer's foundation when he was our quarterback in Denver. And of course, you and I, with Jake, we go back to our Arizona State days. So that was, personally a lot of fun when Jake came and played for us in Denver all those years later. And Judy Ann ran his foundation. So while we're doing all our work with him internally and with the media, Judy Ann's working with him in the community and managing his foundation. So we came to know each other through that. And as time went on and Jake retired and they continued to work together, but he wasn't doing all the same things as he was when he was an NFL quarterback, but continuing to have a lot of things in that realm. Judy Ann had envisioned the idea for how professional athletes don't all have that capacity and desire and need to have an entire foundation and a board, but they want to do things in the community. They want to help people. They want to build their brand. They want to make an impact. And that was the genesis of our company was we can be that two-person shop that knows the industry inside and out, has relationships with players, and can help plug them into causes and important things in the community where they can make a difference with relationships that we both already had in different spaces. So the local charitable community, those causes and needs, and then the corporations that wanted to do three-way cause marketing. So really that was a premise for it, where the team leaves off, where the agent leaves off. In most cases, some, are so large they have a marketing arm and events. But by and large, it was to fill that space and help really accelerate and amplify the amount of impact they can have in the community. So Judy Ann continues to do so much of that great work, and we're still great friends to this day. We did that 3 years together, 2008 to 2011, and it was really, again, what we did sort of paralleled and amplified what she was already doing on her own with athletes. She had worked with Kurt Schilling, and that led to working with Fenway Sports during those years and continues to. So it was kind of multifaceted, and now she continues to do that work with Fenway Sports and with other athletes, with a lot of Denver Broncos players, and that umbrella of ProLink Sports lives on as the business name, which is fun to see. We both put a lot into it. She had laid the foundation for it over years and years of a great career, and it's fun now to this day to keep in touch and share the funny stories that still go on in that realm, when you're working on your own with athletes in the community and all the demand and attention on them. But it was a really great experience that helped broaden my scope. It was very different. I had always worked within an organization, college or pro, that had really broad structure to it. And to be sort of on your own, even though it was a partnership, that was not comfortable. And I enjoyed a lot of parts of it, but I had to really grow because I was not entrepreneurial and didn't think that way. And, I realized more and more that I really thrive in a team environment, having a defined role and then trying to maximize that, do it well, and build on it.
Yeah. Now the transition back to college, first it was Drake University for you, then it was Colorado State. Is working for a smaller college much different than it is for a bigger university like Utah?
It is, but the fundamentals are the same. That's the thing I always come back to, and I know I've said it several times. It comes back to people. You have to learn who the people are, what's important to them, and how you can have the greatest impact. Being authentic, but trying to apply the experience you have to make an impact. Yeah, the scale can be different. The amount of media coverage can be different, but the fundamentals are the same. And it's trying to equip people to be successful and for people to know about their accomplishments.
Now, Utah had a really good football season, but they didn't win their bowl game against Texas. What are the comparisons between a bowl game and a Super Bowl?
You know, it's interesting because it's been so long since I've worked at a Super Bowl. I'm sure even the madness of it and scale is so different now, than it was, than the madness that we knew back then. But, I was thinking of that when we were in San Antonio at the Alamo Bowl recently. Some of the pace of the week and the next thing, it's kind of fundamental to me that I think it's part of my fabric that I just go back and I remember some of those things and equate them. Sometimes that experience helps in seeing the opportunity there in this next thing, whether it's the players' press conference, whether it's the head coach's press conference. I think back to some of those experiences to inform how do we prepare our people, how do we not just go do that and fulfill the piece of it, but how do we really maximize it for Utah athletics, for Utah football, for our head coach and players. I think of some of those dynamics of the press room and the people there, each looking for their unique angle that will make their story or their piece better than a different one or more unique. So I do think back to some of those things and the competition and what they're ultimately trying to accomplish and how do we position our people to make the most out of this opportunity.
Mm-hmm. What's the best piece of advice you've gotten working in this industry?
I feel like so many of them just center around, be yourself. Keep learning who that is and don't try to be somebody else. But at the same time, don't ever stop learning. Don't ever stop observing what others do and how they do it and why they're successful. Those can conflict sometimes and seem contradictory, but they really go together. There have been so many people in the business who I've observed and I really admire for how they carry themselves or the way they handle pressure, the ideas they come up with. Whatever it may be, I think you can still observe and learn from that, but you can't try to be someone you're not. That lack of authenticity will show through and ultimately harms, I think, your ability to have an impact. There's nothing to gain from that, and we're so much more effective when we, over time, learn who we are and what we have to offer to a situation. But it comes back to humility. It comes back to respecting people and just having a great work ethic. So in some way over time, I've been told all those things. I've seen them demonstrated. So that's my really broad answer to what's the best piece of advice.
Yeah.
But also I'd say it's to be patient with it and trust that you are where you are for a reason. We don't know how long that'll be, but trust it. And yeah, not every situation stays the same forever, and change comes, and you have to be equipped for that as well. But I think especially when we're younger, it's so hard to have a scope on what being patient means, because at the same time, you need to have a sense of urgency to try to improve and grow and get better.
For someone young who's looking at a career in sports information, media relations, public relations, is there anything you can recommend for them that they might want to consider doing to prepare themselves for a career in this, and maybe describe what the career is like?
I think if a person is still a college undergraduate and they have the chance to do this kind of work as I did when I was a student and just as the students do in the office that I manage now, I think that's invaluable. And there are so many areas of intercollegiate athletics where one can get in there and get that experience. And the other area is minor league sports and events, depending on what city one lives in. If it is a city and it has some of those events that come and are sort of one-off things but have continuity from year to year, there's a lot of experience to be gained there too. And I think diversifying that as much as one can will help them in their career. Kind of having an eye on who seems to be successful and try to get an opportunity to learn from them. But again, when someone is just starting out, one, you might not have that discernment, and two, you can't really be picky anyway, but it's just something
True.
I think over time for that antennae to pick up. But just do as much as you can without expecting to get something from it, whether pay or some benefit, if it seems like what you enjoy doing and you're getting to work on it with others in a real environment, it is valuable and it will grow from there. Now, once, beyond college, it's harder for me to say, and I've been asked that so many times over the years, because that was a path I took. I don't know as well how one does it when they're beyond that phase, but I do, but it's not as defined a track. That minor league sports opportunity or events, that's still there. It's just harder to do the college sports part of it when you're not an undergrad anymore.
What would you like sports fans to know about what it is a person in your role does to help the viewer enjoy the sport?
I think ultimately it's to help them understand better who the people are, what unique story there is, what makes them different, what inspires them. When you watch a broadcast, and the best announcers are so good at this, they all are. They've done their preparation, they've read the clips, they've had their conversations with us and then with the coaches and in some case student athletes. Those who have a mind and an ear toward learning what those stories are and then asking good questions to gain more perspective, end up telling those throughout the broadcast. That to me is one of the foundational pieces of what we do. And if we're doing it well, then those announcers are more equipped to tell that story over the course of a 3 to 4 hour football broadcast or over a basketball or any other sport. Now, that's just one aspect of it. There's also the news media who can do features for TV and online and newspapers, et cetera. The more ideas there are out there about who our people are, I just think that there's a chance to inspire people. A lot of that starts from us being able to learn what those stories are and what makes our people interesting. And we don't always know every one of them, and sometimes those things are really private to the person, and that's our number one thing to respect. And that's not a story we have to tell. That's okay. But there's always a bunch of them out there, and they're great. And that's one of the most satisfying parts is when you learn one of those, they're really interested in telling it, and you help them do it. And I think everybody just benefits from that. If somebody likes sports and they also are interested in the people involved, that's just some of the most fun there is.
Yeah, well, I can't thank you enough for the time that you spent with me. I'm so glad we've continued our friendship over the years, and I apologize for not having kept in touch more frequently.
Well, it's okay. This is fun because it's been so fun to see what you've done over your career, and this proves that it doesn't matter how much time goes by. Pick up right where we left off, right. and I congratulate you on a great career, and I'm grateful that you thought of having me on. I hope the things I thought of from those years in this business have been interesting and helpful, and didn't ramble on too much.
That was a conversation with my friend Paul Kirk, Associate Athletics Director for Strategic Communications with the University of Utah. Paul is one of the good guys in this industry, the guys that genuinely want to help reporters and broadcasters, and one of those people who cares about others. Like many in this industry, he works long hours, so I appreciate his time and appreciate that he's given us a glimpse of what goes on in his world. One of the things I've learned recently is to keep in contact with your friends and colleagues to continue building that relationship. So it was great catching up with him again and finding out how he's made an impact in this industry. On the next Sports in the Making podcast, spring training starts in just a few weeks, so I'll sit down with former Major League Baseball coach Carlos Alfonso. He's worked in baseball at all levels for more than 50 years as a player, manager, coach, and director of international development. We'll talk about his career, the responsibilities that certain coaches have, and how MLB teams are finding international players. If you like this episode, be sure to like it and share it on your social media channels, and positive reviews are always appreciated. Also be sure to subscribe to Sports in the Making so you don't miss out on more episodes. If there is something that you would like to know more of in sports, drop me a line on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. You can also visit sportsinthemaking.com to catch up on previous episodes. I'm your host, Don Cardona. Thank you for listening to Sports in the Making.